We're now beginning a series of videos giving some specific strategies for greater student engagement. Again, I encourage you to read more about this in the book Inspiring Active Learning by Merrill Harmon, available from Amazon and other fine retailers. In the last session, I mentioned the value of having a quick-paced lesson. Now, remember, it's not so much that you're rushing or losing all the students, but it's quick enough that students don't have much, if any, mental downtime. You want students to work to keep up with you rather than having them sit back and waiting for you to move on. Part of that emphasis on a quick pace is having a variety of lesson activities during the class time. So over the next few sessions, we want to discuss some possibilities. Again, read more in Harmon's book for more detail on these. One strategy is called Whip Around Pass Option. This is used to increase the number of students who speak up when you're dealing with something about which there might be more than one or two possible answers. I mean, we're not talking here about using this when there is just a single answer to something. Instead, it's where you might be talking about application, like maybe you're studying Proverbs in Bible class, and you want students to share the meaning of one proverb of their choice. This might come after you've given them a few minutes to look through, say, chapter 15 of Proverbs and select one proverb that's particularly meaningful to them. So what you would do then is you would say, okay, starting at this side of the room, each of you share what proverb you chose. If you'd rather not answer, just say, I pass, and then go right down the row and keep going. Go. And one thing here is that you want it to move along quickly. Don't take time to call on each student by name. Don't take time to respond to each student or to repeat what each student says. You want them to be listening to one another, and you want it to move along quickly. You know, if it's the first time you've done it, you might need to call on each student and say, okay, you're next, but don't spend a lot of time talking about it. Get the kids in the habit of listening to who is before them and being ready to speak. And don't have one kid say a lot or talk a long time. You just want a few sentences, then move to the next one. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. My class would rather just pass than say anything. I'd end up with every single kid saying pass. Yeah, you're going to have some students like that, especially in high school. Two things here. One, this is not the only method you use for class participation or for having students speak. So, if you've got Johnny who just passes every time, there's going to be other strategies used to get him speaking. Second, over time, you'll find that when students see this activity as non-threatening, that is, you're not using it for questions that have a right answer and you're not using it to test them, they'll most likely start speaking out later, or they'll say something when you deal with a different topic. Now, one of the most important strategies, we've talked about this in asking questions to the class, is to allow for sufficient wait time. That is, time between when you ask the question and when you call on a student to answer. That wait time is important for the students to be able to access their long-term memory and retrieve the answer, and for them to mentally formulate that answer. However, when you do this purely orally, you don't know that students are actually thinking. They might just be daydreaming, figuring that, okay, if she calls on me, I'll just say I don't know, or I'll start thinking then. Instead, here's what you can do. Let's say you're in literature and you're studying Oliver Twist. You might say, okay, what was going through Oliver's mind when Mr. Bumble said that? Jot down what you believe he was thinking. Go. Then give them a minute or two. Watch for when 3 or 4 students seem to have finished, and then say, okay, just another moment. When a few more have finished, then call on a few students to answer the question. Don't let things slow down. Don't give time for every single student to write everything he could possibly say. You want to keep things moving along. Notice, you're not here looking for them to turn something in. You're not even looking for complete sentences. This is just a way to get them thinking profitably about the question. And the act of writing something down forces them to give more thought to it. Then, when you call on someone, he will have his notes to refer to, rather than just having to come up with something on the spot. Another strategy using writing is outcome sentences. In this case, at the end of a lesson or a segment of a lesson, you might ask the students to reflect on the lesson and start a sentence with things like, I learned something. I wonder something. I was surprised when something. I'd someday like to something. I disagree with whatever. I would like to find out more about something. Just give a minute or two again. Watch the students for the pacing. What you're doing here is getting students to start reflecting on what they're learning. This helps cement it in their minds in addition to making their learning meaningful to them. After they write, you could ask for some volunteers to read one of their outcome sentences. Have a few of them do that. Then have students pair up and share some of their outcome sentences with each other. This helps other students see things they might have missed. You could also do the whip around pass option here to have them share their outcome sentences. And you could then follow up with any additional points that need emphasis. You might have the students keep a notebook or a learning log where they keep all their outcome sentences for the course. Later they could use that as a review for tests. Or you could use it for other activities. You might say maybe you've got a unit on weather and you have students select an outcome sentence and they select one of their outcome sentences and write it on a raindrop that you use to go onto the bulletin board. So a number of ways that you could use this technique. Now, here's one I've briefly mentioned in a previous video, Under-Explain with Learning Pairs. In this strategy, you explain some material briefly so that only some students understand it, and then ask them to work in pairs to help each other learn it. Maybe you do something like this. Okay, we want to find 40% of 200. What we're going to do is this. I'm going to multiply 200 by 0.4. So we'll say 200 times 0.40. 0 times 0 is 0, so I've got a 0 in the tens place down here, so I just move over. 4 times 0 is 0, 4 times 0 is 0, 4 times 2 is 8. I have 2 decimal places here, so I move over 2 decimal places here, put my decimal point, and so now my answer is 80.0, and that is 40% of 200. Okay, so after you've done that, then you might say, now I want you to find out what 40% of 120 is. Give them a minute to work it out. While they're working that out, you work it out on the board. And then you would say, okay, how many of you got 48? I worked it out up here. How many of you did it like that? Now, you might say, I've put 3 more problems on the board. Work them by yourself. Then turn to a partner, compare your answers, and help each other understand how to get the answer. If you both understand, try making up a new problem for each other. Ready? Go! While they work, you're working them out on the board, and walk around the room to see who understands and who might need a bit more help. If they don't get it, say, ask another pair for help. They seem to have it over there. When about half the pairs have finished, say, just another minute. Now notice what's going on here. At your first explanation, some of the kids are going to understand it. You show them how to do 40% of 200, you work out the one problem, and they say, okay, I know what to do. But then what happens, you have other students who don't get it. If you then go back and explain it again and say, okay, well, what if we had 40% of 120? Let's work through that. Well, the kids who got it the first time are going to drift off. And the students who are struggling, they're not going to get it after a second explanation either, most likely. However, if you explain it one time, the quicker students pick it up, give them practice in it. You're dealing with the kids then who get it the first time, but when they work in pairs, it helps the students who need more explanation. They're listening to each other explain it. And you're also able to go around and give individual help. But you see, what's happening now is it also builds on the fact that a great way to cement understanding in your mind is to explain that to someone else. You all know that when you are teaching something, generally you are learning a lot more than the students are. So, when one student is explaining it to another, if Johnny is showing Billy how to solve the problem, Johnny is also learning it better. So, these are 4 strategies that can be part of a quickly paced lesson. The whip around pass option, question all right, outcome sentences, and under-explain with learning pairs. In the next session, we'll look at a few more effective strategies which help engage all of our students.